Perfect, thank you. So as I said, today is the ACEN WA chapter-led conversation. We're discussing a very topical subject, placement poverty and the student experience. And I think the point of difference really with today's event is that it is going to focus on the student experience and hearing from students that relate to this. Next slide, please. Thanks, Kathy. ACEN acknowledges traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. And I acknowledge that today I'm speaking to you from Wajak Noongar Butja, so Kaya from Walyalup. Next slide, please. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce our two students today. So we have Ruby, who is a third-year social work student from Edith Cowan University, and Brianna, who is a third-year nursing student at Murdoch University. I'm just going to read a little bit about their bios for you so you can get a sense of who they are and where they're coming from. And then we're going to ask them some questions about their experiences on placement. Ruby is a third-year social work student at Edith Cowan University in Western Australia. Ruby is studying full-time whilst working in the Department of Communities with Children in Care. At 21 years of age, Ruby has more than 15 months' experience in this field, having moved regionally to Kalgoorlie to begin her work with Department of Communities. Ruby is currently completing her first placement of 500 hours as part of the Child Safety team in the Department of Communities, which is where she's able to apply theoretical knowledge to the real-world setting. Despite struggling with dyslexia, ADHD and lupus, Ruby was able to gain entry to university through an alternate pathway where her hard work and passion for helping the most vulnerable in our community has seen her excel in her studies. Ruby has previously completed a Cert 2 in Community Services and a university bridging course whilst completing her WACE. Previous experience includes administration and ward clerk work within the health services and over 5 years of experience working with children as a dance instructor. Ruby is a strong advocate for social justice, particularly in the realm of child protection. Ruby's studies and career aspirations stem from a desire to positively impact lives and provide a safe space for those in need. Ruby loves learning and will always seize the opportunity to enhance her skills both academically and professionally. And thank you, Ruby. Brianna is a third-year nursing student studying full-time at Murdoch University and works casually at a bakery. Brianna has developed strong communication and social skills through her interactions with people from diverse backgrounds, which she applies to her nursing practice. Brianna has completed 840 hours of practicum placement in many areas of nursing, such as aged care, outpatient departments, oncology, paediatrics, and surgical urology. Brianna completed a rural placement in Geraldton, which enhanced her skills in caring for a smaller population with fewer resources available. Brianna completed a Cert 4 in Prep for Nursing and Health Studies through years 11 and 12, allowing entry into university through an alternate pathway. This sparked Brianna's passion for both nursing and providing quality care to the patients and has seen her thrive during her degree. Whilst completing her studies, Brianna has worked in various health services during the COVID pandemic as a COVID support worker, developing a rapport with patients and visitors, assisting them to directions around the hospital and to sign in for COVID protocols. Brianna is a passionate, aspiring nurse who advocates for her patients and provides the utmost care, ensuring patients and their families feel comfortable and supported through very difficult times. So thank you to both of you for joining us. I guess my first question to you, Ruby, is how did you support yourself financially during your 500 hours of placement this year?
Awesome. Thank you for having us. I'm really happy to be here, and I do hope I can shed some light on this very important topic. Yeah, so there is a lot there is a lot of significant financial impacts that I've experienced whilst being on such a long placement. So 500 hours is expected that it's done over full time. So that's approximately 14 weeks or 3 months. So to prepare for that, I was working 4 days a week and also had to pretty much save my pay slips up right until I went to placement. And the first thing that comes to my mind that I have experienced while being on placement is just the everyday expenses. So although my income has stopped for the past 13 weeks, everyday expenses don't stop. So I do have a car. I still have to get petrol for, car insurance, GP appointments, and just everyday expenses. I recently had an experience where I required to attend a specialist appointment, which is very hard to get into, and it was something that was very important. Specialist appointments are quite pricey. I had to fork out $300 for just the first specialist appointment, and that wasn't including any follow-ups. I also find that since being on placement, I avoid things that I feel aren't 100% vital. So if I have, for example, have had blood tests from a GP appointment, unless it's labeled as urgent, I won't go back to get my results, because these days it is extremely hard to find GPs that do bulk bills. So I've had to put that off for 3 months until I do finish it, which can be, really challenging. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that. Have you, during your studies, had any access to scholarship money or financial support from your education provider? Has there been any help with those costs?
So I was lucky enough to receive a bursary payment of $1,000, which was really helpful because it did assist just for a couple of weeks to be able to pay for petrol. So my placement is 30 kilometers away from my house. I don't have a big car, but it does cost approximately $70 to $80 per week. And that's just one cost there. So that payment of $1,000, as much as I was very appreciative of it, it still wasn't enough. And that it's really hard.
Thank you. That's excellent. Brianna, we might move across to you now to hear from you about your experiences. So you are now at the end of your Bachelor of Nursing degree and about to graduate, and you've had lots of different experiences, including a rural placement. And I would love for you to tell everyone here today about your experiences on placement and the financial challenges you've faced while working casually.
Thanks, Chris. So over the last 3 years of my degree, I have been on quite a few placements. I had a rural placement in Geraldton this year, and usually on my placements, I will work on the weekends just to give me a little bit of money just to get through the weeks, petrol. If my placement is a little bit further away, on my late shifts, I don't want to be catching public transport late at night when I finish at 9-10 p.m. Working on the weekends just to cover petrol and parking at hospitals is a lot of money, especially because often they don't provide us with discounted parking. But when I went to Geraldton, we were provided with accommodation, which was paid for. However, that was the only thing that was provided for us. So I still had to provide anything else I needed to feed myself, so weekly groceries. And when you're not having an income consistently, that does add up. Needing breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day for 4 weeks does cost a lot of money. And I wasn't able to work on the weekends and get that little bit of income like I usually do on my placements. So I had to really use my money wisely and save up for quite a while before I went on this placement, just to, have that rural experience.
Excellent, thank you. I noticed that you had been in receipt again of that rural placement support, and I know Murdoch University does provide a bursary similar to what Edith Cowan's doing. Did that make a difference in a small way? Did it kind of take some pressure off you in that approach to doing a rural placement?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like if accommodation was a cost I had to cover, I would not have been able to afford that. 4 weeks is a long time, and if I had to fork out money for accommodation to go to an unpaid placement, I wouldn't have found that to be very helpful at all. So yeah, the accommodation being provided was definitely a big help, because I wouldn't have been able to afford it if that wasn't provided.
Right, thank you very much. I did pick up on the comment around not being able to work casually, particularly when you're away on a rural placement, and that resonates with my experience of talking to nursing students. And one of the consequences of that is that when they are purchasing food, when they're on a rural placement, is perhaps that food might be things like 2-minute noodles, and that they really have to budget right down to bare essentials. Was that kind of something you experienced when you were away on placement?
Yeah, so I prepared for this placement for quite a few months before. Just, if I saw something on special, I would, grab it, and I kind of accumulated essential products throughout the months leading up. But yeah, during the weeks, there was, especially towards the end of my placement when my money was running quite thin, I was having to buy, frozen meals that were not very much, or yeah, 2-minute noodles just to get me through. And I found I wasn't eating very well towards the end of my placement, trying to, 3 meals a day is a lot when you think about it. So yeah, that was a big impact for me towards the end. So I was very happy to come home and have better food.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much to both Ruby and Brianna. I hope you will stay with us because we're going to move on to the next presenter, who's Daniela. But I would love for you to hang around because I'm sure there'll be questions for you after the presenters have spoken. So please stay with us if you've got time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next slide, please, Kathy. And I'm going to introduce Daniela Niv. And she is the Work Integrated Learning Manager at Murdoch University. And I'll let Daniela speak now and take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And it's actually really nice to hear from students in these types of events that we have, because we think about it so much in terms of like our university, our industry partners, and obviously there's always the concern about students, but particularly from someone that comes from a central function in the university, it's really nice for me to hear all those stories. So thank you very much, Ruby and Brianna, for sharing that. So I am the manager for the Work Integrated Learning team here at Murdoch. So I'll talk about what we're doing to prepare for, particularly for the Commonwealth prac payments that have been announced earlier this year. But first, I would like to acknowledge that Murdoch University is situated on the lands of the Whadjuk and Binjarra Noongar people. We pay our respect to their Noongar elders, past and present. This country has always been a place of learning for hundreds of years, and we are proud to continue this long tradition. So, sorry, next slide, please. Just a quick intro. So this presentation, or this talk, feels to me like a bit of therapy, has come up because Mike, the director of Learning, Teaching and Technology, which is where the Work Integrated Learning team fits within the Murdoch's organizational structure. We've been talking quite a bit about how are we going to operationalize this initiative that has come with very little information. So we've been trying to find ways to work on what we do know, and then kind of put what we don't know in the parking lot so we can deal with it when we do have that information, but not wait until it's very close to the deadline of the 1st of July next year to start doing something. So that's why the authors are both Mike and I, because this is a version of something that we've prepared internally. So that everyone else in the university actually understands what's going on. Next slide, please. So just running quickly through the content. I'm going to talk a little bit about Murdoch's context, because obviously I'll run you through our thinking, but we're talking specifically about this university, which has a specific size and specific types of cohorts. So hopefully the thinking will help other people that might be struggling to kind of try to figure out how to deal with this. But it does come within the context of what Murdoch needs and how we're structured. We had a couple of initiatives which I'll really just touch on because Brianna actually spoke about one of them, which is the rural placements for nursing students. Then we'll talk about what we do know, the systems that we have, what we don't know, which can be probably the most extensive list, and concerns and future questions that don't necessarily need to be answered right now to operationalize this particular first tranche of the challenge, but that will come up in future as we go along in this type of payments and structure to recognize that there are financial burdens to students going on placement, and we do need to address that. Next slide, please. So just very briefly about Murdoch University, I guess that the most important part, and I've got 2023 figures, is the most important part, sorry, the next slide, because I'll put a pie chart there, so I want everyone to see it. The most important thing is that we're talking about a university that has about short of 19,000 students onshore last year, and we do have a high percentage of international students overall. The courses that are part of the Commonwealth that fit in under the Commonwealth prac payments guidelines or rules are education and nursing. They have smaller cohorts of international students, but nursing this year we're sitting at about 30%. So it's a high proportion. As a team, as a centralized function here at the university, we've managed last year over 5,000 placements, and it comes as no surprise that the biggest clients are education and nursing. So that'll be fun next year. Next slide, please. Just quickly, the initiatives that we had before knowing that the prac placements were going to happen were a push towards paid placements. So there was originally there was a thinking that if students are getting credit, we're not going to accept for them to get paid. I think that as everyone has started to feel the financial burden of just existing, we've become more understanding of students also needing to pay their bills, like they also have to do all the things that we do that are working here in the university. So there's been more of an understanding that students, we should actually push for students to be paid. So my personal view is that if we could push for all internships, elective placements to be paid, I would always advocate for that, and there's a moving trend towards that. That poses challenges, but I guess we can discuss that during the Q&A and discussion part of our time together. Sponsorships, which include what Brianna was part of, which is the rural subsidies that we give to students when they go out on placements, so that they can have that rural and remote experience when they go to placement. That's specifically for nursing. We would like to spread it across, but it's, no one's got an endless amount of money. And distributed days for education students, they can be a benefit and a hindrance, but it gives more flexibility for the students to choose when they're going to placement and discuss that with their mentor teachers. So that gives them a little bit of flexibility to organize their lives, basically. Sorry, next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about how the prac payments have been announced, because we can find that information, and I'm sure that we can share the resources. But basically from July 2025, we're talking about having eligible students being paid $319.50 per week based on a set of criteria that the government called means tested for when undertaking mandatory placements, and that covers education, nursing, midwifery, and social work only. And they have estimated 140 million per year for that initiative. We have received information that there will be 5% loading for administration of that payment, because they want us as the universities to pay for that, rather than using Centrelink, which was my first thought that was surely going to be done through Centrelink, because they already do payments for students, but that is not to be. So we are responsible for it, and then we're going to get some assistance, financial assistance to do that as well. We have been advised that the program guidelines will be developed in collaboration with university stakeholders. Murdoch, I don't think, has been one of the stakeholders that has been involved in these discussions, so I'll be very keen to hear if anyone has been involved in discussions with the government, because I haven't heard anything just yet. Next slide, please. And so just a little bit on student eligibility, and that's the trickiest part, because we only know very little, and there's lots of questions. So we know it's for domestic students only. The attendance and study mode don't really count, don't really make a difference, is what we understand. There was a stage where we were thinking that there was wording that said up to that amount. So it made us think that perhaps there was going to be a sliding scale, but the understanding at the moment is that that doesn't seem to be the case, that whether if a student is eligible, they receive that amount, but happy to hear otherwise if anyone knows any more information. And there will be 2 factors for means testing, whether they receive income support already, or if they needed to engage in work for an average of 15 hours for 4 weeks before prac commence. That poses a whole host of questions that we don't have answers to, but just putting it there for completeness sake. And we're thinking, and this is our thinking, obviously, if we need evidence to figure out like who receives a payment and who doesn't, then we're like talking about income support, a record of income support from Services Australia, or employer payslips for the students that fall under the category of needing to work an average of 15 hours per week in the weeks leading up to the placement. So next slide so this is what we've done. This is our thinking here internally and how we've gone about dealing with the stuff that we do know and kind of parking the stuff that we don't know. So we know that the WIL team is a central team, so we can make a decision once as to how we're going to do this. And we don't have the complexity of having multiple WIL teams or functions across different schools or faculties. And we are the ones who hold the true information of actual placement duration and how long the students have been out on placement and when. We have identified that we will need an extra position for that, because to administer those payments and work within the system that we develop, because we're at capacity. I think that most people that deal with will understand that is sometimes a very thankless job, and we just need to, make placements out of thin air, and it just doesn't work that way. We then thought, well, we know that we're going to have to make those payments, so let's go to finance and see if they have a system. So we were very happy to find out that they do have a system here that they can replicate, which was what they used to make COVID emergency payments for our students a few years back. But they did tell us that they need to be provided exactly everything that they need to do. So they're not going to be doing any thinking for us. They have the systems, they will make the payments according to what we tell them, and then they have given us the information that they need, so student details and payment instructions. Then we went on to, so what else do we know and who else do we need to talk to? And that was the student system, so the IT function of the university that deals with student information. So we're trying to, so we'll know that we need to pay the students, so therefore we'll need bank account details. We don't, as a WIL team, we don't want to have that information in our systems. We don't want to be responsible for that. So we are looking at storing that information somewhere else. That is someone else's responsibility. The WIL team is particularly concerned about data safety. We already collect so much information from our students that is sensitive, so we don't want to have any more added to that. So the system, that information is going to live somewhere else, and we've requested that they actually build a system to process these applications and collect the student data that we don't have, and then just integrate the student data that we do have. So not to replicate anything that doesn't need to be replicated, but just add and integrate is the idea. We've requested it. Now, what they come up with will very much depend on the rest of the information that we don't know, but we've given them the heads up and a little scope of what we would need. And the idea is that this WIL officer that we'll need to get is the one who works across these applications. So using Sonia, which is where we have is a source of truth, and interacting with a different application system, which is where the students will apply and request to be vetted for these payments. If anyone has been following the US elections, this is what we call, what fits in the category of a concept of a plan, right? It's not an actual proper plan. We could only work with what we know. So then we go on to the next slide, which has the the biggest concern, which is what we don't know. So we don't know what the payment frequency will be. We've had multiple discussions across with multiple people thinking, well, it makes sense for it to be paid, you know, on a weekly basis, because the whole point is for them to have the money whilst they are on placement and they're not working. And then someone comes like, well, but how will we know? And how are we going to, you know, process those payments? And so when does it start? Is it going to be paid in arrears? Is it going to be paid in advance? Is it going to be a block before the placement? Is it going to be a block after the placement where we've confirmed actual hours? We don't know. That's a mystery for now. Are payments based on days, weeks, or blocks? Obviously, that will make a difference, particularly for distributed days students. So if they're organizing themselves over a longer period of time, then that will affect how they'll be considered when the application comes through. And what happens, and we love this one, when the student withdraws, and it poses all sorts of complications already. And then when we add on, you know, making payments as well, that we're like, oh, we know this, we parked it, and we're trying to forget about it until we actually have more information, because otherwise the stress is just too high. And we don't know what the government reporting requirements will be, but I'm sure they'll tell us eventually. So we're just aware of that. And lastly, our broader, like, philosophical concerns and future questions, which was my first question in the whole when we heard about it, is like, should we even be responsible for this? Like, are universities best placed to make those payments? I see some heads going like that. Is there enough money for everyone eligible? I'm not quite sure. And if anyone knows how that calculation, that budget allocation was made, please share with the class, because I'm not quite sure. And will they run out of money? I don't know. Will this funding continue in the long term? Mystery. What about the other disciplines? So we have mandatory placements for exercise science, exercise physiology. They haven't been graced with these payments, and I know that other universities that have physiotherapy and other allied health, we have psychology as well. So they haven't been graced with this with these payments. And what can we do to help international students? Because here we're talking about a nursing cohort that has like between 20 to 30%, depending on the year. And it might be challenging for them to see other people being paid and not have that same support. So I went over time, but very keen to hear what other universities are doing. If anyone has any thoughts and concerns, and perhaps use this as a collective therapy to talk about it and see if anything comes out of our discussion that we can actually action or ask questions about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. That was
that's right. I tried to cram it into.
No, it was great. It was such an interesting presentation. I'm really keen to hear from other universities when we get to the Q&A section. So if you can hold your questions and queries for Danny, I would love to now introduce Jasmine Tweed from the Curtin University Guild. And Jasmine is going to speak with us now about her experiences with students at Curtin University.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine. As mentioned, I'm the Curtin Student Guild President for 2024. A guild is basically a student union that all public universities in WA have. And then as president, I'm the leader of the one at Curtin University. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land I'm presenting from today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. It is a privilege that I get to live and learn on Whadjuk Noongar Budja, and I have my entire life. This land is stolen land and sovereignty has never been ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I'll take us on to the next slide. So this is it's an overwhelming slide, the next one, where it's kind of the reality of placement poverty in this country, where it's a very uncomfortable conversation that, you know, members of parliament and even university execs who received their education for free and never had to go through the experience of going on an unpaid placement was paying an astronomical amount for their degree and the lifestyle of university students was very different at that time, communicating that the reality of placement poverty is students going hungry, it is students being homeless, it is students coming onto campus and trying to stay in the library for as long as possible because they have nowhere to go home to, because they can't afford to pay their rent or any of their expenses whilst going on placement. And what we see at the Curtin Student Guild is students that are forced to delay their studies to save up more money to be able to go on placements, or people trying to move as many of their placement units towards the end of their degree in order to save up, and then kind of reaching a point where they actually can't finish their course because they cannot afford to go on placement, which is, it's a really sad reality that we are seeing more and more across this country, especially during the cost of living crisis. So this is, some of the headlines that we've seen recently. And the Curtin Student Guild, whilst campaigning on the issue of placement poverty since 2020, we're working very closely with the ABC to get a lot of traction on these articles. And especially at the Curtin Student Guild and at Curtin University, our biggest cohort is health sciences, and with that, our nursing school is one of our most popular schools. And of course, the issue of placement poverty within nursing and health sciences and humanities with education is kind of at a critical stage. And we've seen some response from the government, but it's kind of what next is from that. So I'll take us on to our next slide. So in terms of what the Curtin Student Guild and what a lot of guilds across WA do in particular for students who go on placement and who are experiencing financial and academic concerns with that is a student assist service of some kind. So here in 2023, on the Curtin campus, we saw a 69% increase in monetary support provided to students, with a large amount of that cohort actually coming from students on placement across health sciences and humanities. And we saw a huge spike in the amount of wellbeing and student assist sessions needing to be had by students who were experiencing financial and academic difficulties whilst on placement, and we reached an all-time high of 9,332 cases in 2023. And just for context, there are across Curtin's campuses, we have about just over 50,000 students, but on the Bentley campus in particular, we have less than 30,000 students internal on Bentley. And to basically have it be borderline 1 in 3 students needing to have some sort of student assist intervention, it's extremely concerning. And then we kind of have those reactive services that the Guild and the university provide to students, like the Curtin Pantry, which we have seen again at an all-time high demand, with $1,000 worth of food being gone in less than 24 hours. And for the students that do kind of put in their details of who they are, and we're able to kind of track some of the courses that they're from, health sciences and international students were two of the biggest users of the Curtin Pantry. And of course, in particular from the allied health field, which indicates to us that there are students on placement who are struggling to the point where, they are unable to feed themselves on placements that whilst they're on placement. We also, the Curtin University also has some other initiatives like $1,500 bursary for students in teaching, like similar bursaries and responses that the university has tried to do whilst filling the gap in the lead up to paid placements in this country, which we've seen across WA. ACT government also introduced it prior to the budget announcements from the federal government. So it is something where for a long time universities and guilds have been put in a position where we've had to react to student poverty and placement poverty rather than taking a proactive front. And I think as students in particular find that extremely frustrating because, universities and guilds promise things like paid placements. As soon as they start their degree, you're there for 4 years, and it's taken a long time to actually achieve something like that. So we are put in a position to put a lot of resources into kind of reacting to immediate needed support for students on placement. So I'll take us to the next slide. If Yep. So in terms of what the Curtin Student Guild has been doing to end placement poverty in this country is, we launched a huge campaign in 2021 where, especially during COVID, where a lot of students were struggling and the demand for nurses and people in healthcare were at an all-time high, yet students weren't being supported whilst going on placements when they started back up again. And that was a big struggle, where you're in a critical field where if you were already finished your degree, you'd be paid a significant amount and were remunerated for the hard work that you do in that space. But if you're a student, you miss out on that completely. So we've started off by gaining a lot of media attention, and we participated significantly in the Australian Universities Accord, which was the huge reform that ultimately led to the government introducing paid placements for the 3 areas of concerns initially. The Curtin Student Guild was the only student organisation in the country to participate in all processes of the Accord, and we were called upon by the panel to actually submit a separate paper on placement poverty in Western Australia, because it is something that we had collected significant data on and had been working on the space, and was the most active student union in the country to be working on this campaign. In particular, at Curtin, 30% of our students are from the equity cohort, and about 17% of our students are international students. So combined with that, the level of placement poverty at Curtin and across WA was ridiculous, and students were ultimately crying out for help at this stage. And the Curtin Student Guild saw this as our opportunity to use that data and the collation of stories from students across all different faculties, and to submit that to the government and have it be heard for the first time in decades since the last round of reform happened. And then when the budget announcement for paid placements was released, the Curtin Student Guild was referenced by the Department of Education as to why they were going down the path of paid placements, which was it was a huge sigh of relief for a lot of nursing and midwifery, social work and teaching students. But we do recognise, as previously mentioned by Daniela, there is a lot of flaws in what was announced, with a big thing being it's below minimum wage. It's $9 an hour. Students will be paid whilst going on these placements. It's not to all students, so international students won't get it. And again, it's restricted to the cohorts of nursing, midwifery, social work and teaching. And, just at the Curtin Medical School, students in medicine go on 2 years worth of unpaid placements, 2 full years. And so that alone, having different cohorts, physio, OT, big areas of need in health sciences, again, not being paid whilst on placement. And then that not even addressing the international students who pay significant course fees to be able to study in this state will not be paid whilst their peers will be for the exact same work. And it's kind of in our next steps going forward, what the Guild is campaigning for is we're partnering with trade unions like the Australian Services Union and the Australian Council of Trade Unions, who are pushing for all students on mandatory placements to be paid, and to be paid at the minimum wage, and for it to be recognised as productive work. So you are protected by the Fair Work Act, and you actually have workers' rights in your placements, and therefore, are protected by your award and minimum wage standards in your field. And also, again, for all students on placement to be paid, and for it to be communicated effectively to students, like, what is your justification for these 3 areas to be paid? Why $9 an hour? Why means testing? Like, having a lot more transparency around it as well, because I think especially how it was hard to escape when we submitted hundreds of students' experience on placement and the poverty they were experiencing when that was submitted to the government. It's hard to ignore things like that, and to, for the government to not respond to students and respond to guilds being like, well, we've got a line of students who show up homeless within the first 4 weeks of semester when they go on placement. Like, how do we respond to that? How can you deny paying those students? yeah, so that's the big push that we're going for next, whilst also still having our student assist services and working with the university and kind of more those reactionary modes, whilst also continuing our fight to end placement poverty in this country, because it is something that shouldn't exist. And yeah, so that's kind of our main areas of focus. I feel like I've just been yapping for like a non-stop in a bit of a spiral, but yeah, so that's basically what the Guild has been up to and what we're doing next.
Amazing work, Jasmine. You haven't been just waffling and going on. It's actually been, I can feel your passion, and I'm so conscious that there needs to be people out there with that passion. I think those of us that work in the will space, like Danny was kind of referring to, we work in this space, we hear these stories, we see the challenges, and it's heartbreaking. And so all the things you've described, I have seen, and I've had to try and support students. I'm just conscious we've only got 15 minutes, but I feel like there's so many questions that the participants here might have for you as our panelists. So are you happy if we open the floor up to questions? I'm happy at this stage if anyone's got raised hands. So I can see Brahm Majadi. Would you like to ask your question, Brahm? Thank you.
Yes, thank you to all the speakers. Amazing. I'm Brahma Yadi. I'm from the School of Medicine at Western Sydney University. I'm a newcomer to this placement poverty sort of topic, because one of my students asked me to supervise their research project on this. So I'm still learning. But my question, like being a newcomer in the space, is actually twofold. First of all, is this something that has been going on all these years? Because I understand that the model of placement has been around like forever, or is this just because of the current cost of living crisis? Because this has a very big implication. If there's going to be policy changes, is that only temporary, or should it be like forever? And that links to my second question, which is closely related. Where should the money come from? Because my community partner said, we don't have money to pay the students. In fact, it takes our time to train the students, and we're not getting paid by the university to do that, right? And if it's from the government, then what level of government should that be? Should it be federal? Should it be state? Should it be the Ministry of Health? Should it be the hospital or services? So where, reasonably the money would come from without driving inflation up? Thank you.
Thank you, Brahm. Great questions. I'm probably going to ask Danny to help me answer. I don't want to put any of the students in the spotlight to answer it. I've been doing my role in undergraduate nursing placements for nearly 12 years now, and I have seen an escalation in the level of placement poverty. It's always been there. I remembered receiving phone calls from hospitals saying, your student's turning up in dirty uniforms, can you have a word to them? And when I actually got that student in, she was living in a car, she had no food, she didn't have any capacity to wash those uniforms. So we actually uncovered something that the student was actually quite ashamed of and didn't want to come to us for help. And so what I've seen in the last 10 to 12 years is there's been a shift that students are more willing to seek help and they're coming forward rather than hiding in the shadows, which is what used to happen in my experience. But I agree, great questions. Where does the money come from? Because that's going to be the big political push. And I'm so pleased to hear Jasmine's passion, because I feel like it is going to have to be a big push, that universities cannot take this on themselves. There's no budget for it. But also, is it something the public sector, that the federal budget, is it something they should support? I feel like the answer might be yes, because we've got work health force shortages in these areas, particularly areas of need, and we do need to have some ownership around how do we best support increasing workforce in those fields. So I don't know if Danny wants to jump in and offer her thoughts.
I would just say, I echo what you're saying, Chris, although I haven't been in this space as long as you have, but I think that a lot of the work that Jasmine and her team and other guilds across the country have been doing has also had an impact on students coming and actually being able to voice their problems. I think that that kind of links to what I had said before about paid placements, where it has just been this tradition of, well, toughen up, just go through it. We've all done it, and then you'll be better off at the other end. But at this point, people just can't toughen up. Like there's no toughening up past living in your car. And just hearing the stories, like Brianna just saying that she was on compromising her food, you know, to be on placement, like that's insane. We definitely shouldn't be in this sort of situation. So in terms of where the money comes from, I quite like what you were saying, Jasmine, about being meaningful work, being considered as meaningful work, and therefore being part of falling under the Fair Work Act, because I guess the vocational placements are part of vocational placements, so they're considered differently, and there are reasons for that. But I think perhaps it is time to revisit that section of vocational placements in a whole host of areas, and therefore perhaps making hospitals, which is state level, education departments at state level, understand that if they want this workforce, then they should actually be part of the people that are investing in that as well, and therefore have a classification for these students that are not like, because at the moment we negotiate placements and agreements and stuff, and then the students are completely different and very clearly separate to the workforce, but like, should they really be, or should they be a category within the workforce that is considered as part of their EBA if we were to change a Fair Work Act? You know, like there are different parts, but I think that my personal opinion is we should all be pushing in this direction, because it's coming to us also, as you mentioned, industry partners wanting to be paid for the hosting students. And in nursing and education, like we do have that, particularly in Western Australia. But then it's creeping into allied health placements, and we're coming to a point where we're just like, well, don't send these students in this place because they want to charge us for hosting the students. Meanwhile, the students don't get paid, don't have any money. So it's a very tricky system, and I think that we should all parties should get together and have, you know, concerted efforts. I'm very inspired by the work that you and your guild have been doing, Jasmine. So I think we should all get behind that as institutions.
Absolutely. Great, Danny. Jasmine, did you want to speak to Bram's questions at all?
Just quickly on terms of, is this something that has always existed or kind of gone unspoken? As a part of our campaign, we went through GROC, which is our student media, and we went through articles and things of when our nursing school first opened, which is, we just celebrated 50 years, and kind of we went through different decades. And placement poverty, it was something that was always submitted in kind of like the agony aunt section, or it is something that was always discussed and has been discussed for decades. And again, it's the mentality of like, well, I did it, pull up your bootstraps, get on it, that type of thing. It just doesn't work in this financial climate. And then in terms of where is this money going to come from, ultimately, you know, there are different paths of where the funding of this will come from. I don't think it's not a matter of the burden of the university. It needs to come, the funding needs to come from a federal level or delegated to, you know, to a state level. And it ultimately needs to be our government who funds this. You know, whether the issues about the administration of it, but yeah, it'll have to be our government that funds this until it is classed as productive work. And, you know, then people who take on these students and receive that free work, they will be burdened with the cost.
Excellent, thank you. I think Ruby would like to add to this part of the discussion too, so I'll invite Ruby to join us.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't sure how to put the little hand up. If it's okay, I just wanted to add kind of my perspective just from my real life experience. So from what I found is it's not that placement poverty has never occurred. From what I've experienced 20 years ago, I know I had this conversation with my mum. She did not expect to have myself and my sister, so we're in our 20s, to be living at home, because that wasn't, when she was 18, 19, 20, herself and all her friends her age, they moved out and then they continue with their life. Because of the cost of living and the inflation, I found that it is, one, a lot harder, obviously, to be able to do the things that happened maybe 20, 30 years ago, which is okay because this is what we've expected to happen. But it's even harder because I know my parents, I'm fortunate enough that they would financially support me if they could, but they are also in this cost of living. They are also living in this crisis. They don't have spare money to hand me. I know if they did, they would, but they don't have that spare money to just pay for my petrol every week. And that's just to mention, not to say that there's people out there that don't have that support. They don't have that financial support. They don't have just that support network in general. And I'm struggling, and I feel very fortunate to be in the circumstances I'm in. And I don't want to go too much in the tangent on this side of things, but from what I've seen, because of inflation, because of the cost of living, it's not just affecting myself, it's affecting my parents who can't support me financially to be able to successfully go through my prac. But what I've seen is people that do not have any sort of financial support while being on placement. Like a few of you guys have said, they do put their placements off to the end, and sometimes that results in them not being able to do their placement, which is having a direct effect on this underemployment crisis that I have seen and directly been impacted in the line of work I do. So I do, from my non-professional view as a student and as a young person, I feel that it is getting to a crisis point, and it is not just affecting people in a way of they're having to skip meals or they're coming to prac, in dirty clothes. It is affecting our future because we're not going to be able to have those resources and those workers to work in the fields that we need workers in. It's already starting to happen, and it's only going to get worse. And that's just my concern, being someone going into that.
Thanks so much, Ruby. Catherine Hoskin, would you like to jump in here?
I wonder if we need to perhaps look back at some of the history of training of nurses and teachers, because many, many, many years ago, nurses started working in a hospital. They lived in a nursing home, and they had one day in the classroom, and they were being paid while they were a trainee nurse. There were all sorts of problems with that model, huge number of problems, which was why it came into universities and polytechs. But when they did that, they didn't think about the impact of placement. I wonder if we need to think of a kind of hybrid model where we're not doing exactly what was done 50 or 60 years ago, but we're trying to do a little bit of a merge. Teachers for a while were paid while they were training, but they were then bonded. So they then had to work for 3 or 4 years before they could leave the country or go off and do something else, or they could pay back their bond. And if they went into rural areas, it was counted as 2 years. There were all sorts of problems with that model too. But I just wonder if there are some things that we can learn from the past, as in 50 or 60 years ago, and some of those principles could be brought in. And we maybe need to look at the model, not just trying to find scholarships. We maybe need to look at merging it with an apprenticeship model or something like that. WACE had a very, very good webinar last night about apprenticeship model working in the United States. Maybe there are things we really need to look at the model, I think.
Great point, Catherine. Thank you. I agree. As a nurse, a huge fan of what the UK is doing in their internship year, where the students go out on long-term placement and they're paid as part of the workforce. And so I think I agree, there's got to be a kind of a hybrid model between the old and the new that looks at supporting students in that space a little better and recognising the work that they do and that they contribute to our education, health sectors, social work sectors. Are there any other questions? Just having a quick look in the chat. So there's lots of conversation around, the apprenticeship model. I think paying a small stipend is better than nothing. I had a student once say to me, I'd be happy, Chris, with $5 a week because it would at least help towards my petrol or parking or lunch cost. And I thought that was very sad. But it's been a really interesting discussion. A huge thank you to our presenters. We do have a slide on an upcoming, so ACEN are putting on discussions and webinars quite regularly. There is another one happening. Kathy, I don't know if you're able to just share what's coming next slide for anyone that may be interested. And many of these, if you're part of an institution, are free to join because of the institutional membership. So we'd love for you to come along and join us. Jasmine, I don't know if we probably cut you off a bit early, didn't we, because of time? But the key takeaways, I think we've sort of got the message, I feel. So this is the upcoming event, which is happening on the 10th of October. It's professional identity development and the role of work integrated learning and communities of practice. I think the beauty of ACEN, and certainly Danielle has highlighted that, is you're in a shared space with people who feel your pain and also feel the joys of work integrated learning and the importance of work integrated learning in training for our professions. So we would love for you to join us at the next event and keep ACEN on your